So in this video, we're going to look at Christian persecution against the Jewish people in the Middle Ages. Just to be clear, the Jewish Middle Ages began in the year 632 of the Common Era. That was the beginning of the Arab-Muslim conquests, and it goes all the way until 1666, which is the crisis of Shabbatai Tzvi, who was a false messiah of the Jewish people, which we'll talk about later in another video. So it's a 1,000-year period of time, which is a tremendous chunk of history. Even for the Jewish people who've been around for over 3,000 years, this is very significant. And in fact, a lot of the stereotypes that the non-Jewish world has of the Jewish people developed because of the events that happened here in the Middle Ages, which we're going to go through now. So we're going to focus on 6 major events. In this video, we'll begin with the first 3. The first major form of persecution was the Crusades and the massacres that occurred in 1096. Now, I want to point out that puts us about midway through this 1,000-year period, which means for approximately 5 centuries, Jews were living side by side with their Christians with no major changes in their relationship. But it all changed with the Crusades. So what happened? You have the Pope in the West calling for a military campaign to free the Holy Land from the hands of the Muslims. And we have these warriors who are called Crusaders, holy warriors. Now, there were 2 incentives for someone to go on a crusade. One is they were promised immediate entry into heaven if they went on a crusade. And secondly, as you recall, because of the feudal system, most people were still living on their land. They were basically locked on their land. They didn't travel much because of the time of tremendous fear of what was going on in the world, a lot of chaos. But now the Crusades gave someone a chance to venture off the land and travel and see the world. And hence many people left on these crusades. A lot of them were really low-class Christians. And as they're going across Germany, they say, wait a minute, why are we going all the way to Israel to get the Muslims when we have the Christ killers right here in our midst? And therefore, along the Rhine River, there were 3 great Jewish communities in Mainz, Speyer, and Worms, and they attacked the Jews living there and massacred them. Now, the Jews thought they would get protection from their Christian neighbors, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. And many Jews decided it was better to commit mass suicide than to be given over to the Christian crusaders. And many crusaders actually took a vow they wouldn't leave a town until they killed a Jew with their own bare hands. And so we have a major change in the way Christians relate to Jews, because now, in their mind, God sanctioned the killing of Jews. The second major event were libels against the Jewish people. The first was in the year 1179, when a Christian boy in the city of Norwich, England, goes missing. His name was Hugh. Eventually he's found dead, and rumors have spread that the Jews, ever since the crucifixion, have been thirsting for pure, innocent Christian blood. They killed the boy to get his blood, they said, and as a result, the Jews were massacred there in the city of Norwich. That was one type of libel. Now, there was an incentive for that type of libel, because then they could turn that child into a saint, make a monument, and then people would come to visit, and it would help build the economy. So that begins the blood libels, which still go on till today. It's especially prevalent in Arab countries. Then in 1215, a second type of libel develops. The church council comes up with what's known as Transubstantiation, otherwise known as Mass. And the belief is that the bread and wine used during the service turns into the blood and flesh of Christ. So a rumor develops that Jews are bribing the churchgoers to get the wafers so that they can torture the wafers as a way to continuously torture Christ. And as a result, Jews were either massacred, exiled, and their property was confiscated. So those are 2 different types of libels that develop in the Middle Ages. And now the caricature of the Jews as being somewhat demonic develops during this time. The third major event is the Black Death, which occurred between 1348 and 56. What happened is that boats pulled into the ports in Italy, and the sailors were covered with a terrible black disease, many dead on the boat, and quickly that disease spread through Europe, decimating somewhere between 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe. That means about 25 to 30 million people, and it was quick killing. Parents were abandoning their children, children were abandoning their parents, and the Pope was in his castle locked up in a room between 2 fires trying to survive the plague. Now, the Christians believed that God was upset with them, but they were looking for a culprit. And sure enough, rumors spread that the Jews were poisoning the wells of Europe. And as a result, over 300 Jewish communities were wiped out all over Europe. In some places, before the plague even got to that area, the Jews were all massacred. So those are the first 3 events we're going to look at: the Crusades, the libels, and the Black Death. And the Black Death now painted a portrait of the Jewish people as being responsible for mass destruction against the world. So you can appreciate what a miracle it is that we made it through this 1,000-year period We weren't living in our own land well fortified with our army. Rather, we were just little individual communities of Jews living in very hostile territory, suffering through great destruction, and somehow making it to the other end, which we're going to see how that happens coming up very shortly. So let's do a little review. The Jewish Middle Ages goes from 632, the Common Era, with the beginning of the Arab Muslim conquest, and goes to 1666 with the crisis of Shabbatai Tzvi, the false Messiah, which we'll talk about. There are three major events. The Crusades, where over 10,000 Jews were massacred along the Rhine River in the cities of Mainz, Speyer, and Worms, as the Christians were going on their holy war to free the Holy Land from the Muslims. And then we have libels. Beginning in 1179, we have the blood libel, where Christians claim Jews are using Christian blood to bake matzahs. And then in 1215, we have the desecration of the host, which is the libel where Christians claim Jews are taking the wafers and sticking pins in it or pouring hot water on the wafers as a way to continuously torture Jesus. And then we have the Black Death, beginning in 1348, where over 300 Jewish communities were wiped out as a result of the plague that decimated Europe.